Hello, everyone. I'm glad you came here and joined with us. Hold on. I would like to, I'm very, very happy to have with us today Sarah Taki from PATH. Taki, hopefully I'm saying your last word correctly.
Yep.
She's a supported employment specialist and have over 10 years of experience assisting persons with disability in a variety of roles within this. Oh, hello. Thank you. She has over 10 years of experience assisting persons with disabilities in a variety of roles within the social service and employment service sectors. She has a degree in clinical psychology with a minor in sociology and social work and an interest in mental health. Her experience working with vulnerable population within the shelter network has informed her holistic approach to supporting clients and now employment professionals directly through the supported employment service. Sarah is a certified vocational rehabilitation professional and return to work disability management professional, and uses this qualification to support employment services staff in the work with clients with disabilities. We will start the event with a brief presentation, then we will open the floor for questions. So please help me welcome Sarah Taki.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. So like Dina mentioned, we'll start with some brief information about PATH Employment Services, which is the organization that I work for, in case it is of any interest to you to access employment services support. And then we'll talk more about disability rights and employment. So just real briefly here, I'm just getting my mouse ready here. So this is our office, actually, downtown Hamilton. We're located at King Street East. Our phone number and our reception email address is there as well. We will be talking a little bit more about what sets PATH apart from other Employment Ontario service providers. So there are 7 of them in the city of Hamilton that provide employment services support to individuals that are looking for job search assistance, resume help, interview skills, and each of these service providers are great. What sets PATH apart is that we have a specialization in supporting clients that identify as having a disability in finding competitive employment in the field that they're interested in working in, and then offering ongoing support with retaining that job. So here are some examples of the specialized support that we offer. So all of the stuff that is not highlighted is stuff that you would receive at any employment service provider in the city, whereas the highlighted ones are what we do differently because of our specialization. So we specialize in supporting clients with talking about their disability with employers, job development, which is reaching out to employers to find out about jobs and then trying to match you and your skills with the job, peer-to-peer mental health support, employer accommodation support, and access to an occupational therapist for mental health support. So those are some of the features of PATH Employment Services as a whole that you could access if you became a client. Booking appointments for that support, you would call Louise, who's our receptionist. Her phone number is here. Appointments can be virtual or in person, depending on your preference or your needs. And again, we're located at 31 King Street East, which is right downtown Hamilton, right across from Gore Park. All right, let's move into the topic for today. So we're going to talk about disability and employment. And so we got to start from the very beginning, which is talking about disclosure. So if you're an individual that has a disability, whether it's anxiety, cerebral palsy, a vision impairment, sometimes disclosure is a topic that comes up, and it's a topic that has a lot of different components to it, and it's an individual decision and a personal choice. And so when we talk to employers about our disabilities, ideally we're gaining an ally who can help us in setting up an optimal work environment. So if I have a specific need that would allow me to be more successful at work, then if I disclose that to the employer and they meet me there, that would set me up for success and also benefit my employer. So that's the idea behind disclosure. So you would be very clear about what you need to be successful on the job. And it's never about giving medical information that's not needed or appropriate to provide to the employer. So employers are not entitled to know about your diagnosis. They are not entitled to know any specifics around the type of disability that you have. So for example, if you were saying to an employer, I need some sort of accommodation, and we'll talk more about what that means, you wouldn't be saying, I have cerebral palsy, and so I need this. You don't have to do it that way. Rather, it could look something like, I use a wheelchair. I'm a wheelchair user. And so what I need is a bigger desk area that can accommodate my wheelchair, or one that has a specific height so that my wheelchair can roll underneath of the table. And that's all the employer needs to know in order to provide that accommodation, which is the height difference in the desk. That would be an example of an accommodation. So those are just some basics. This is a huge conversation that an entire PowerPoint presentation could be done. So if we have more questions about that, please bring them up closer to the end when we open up the floor for questions. But all of these topics are kind of tangled in a mesh together, so we are going to talk a little bit more about that. So timing of disclosure. So if you're an individual and you're wondering, should I disclose my disability to an employer, and when should I disclose this to the employer? So that leads us to a conversation around, is your disability a visible disability or an invisible disability? So let's define that. So if it's an invisible disability, that means that you look at this person and you have no idea that they have something going on. So, for example, somebody who has anxiety may not show that they have anxiety, and that would count as an invisible disability. Somebody who's a wheelchair user has a very visible cue that they are somebody who has a disability. And so that would be an example of a visible disability. And so the first step when deciding about timing of disclosure is whether or not you believe that there will be conclusions made about yourself when you are presented in front of the employer. So that's why we talk about, if the disability is visible, it's best to disclose prior to the interview. So we don't want employers jumping to incorrect conclusions. What happens is employers will think back to the one person that they know from their history who had the same type of disability, and then jump to any sort of assumptions that they have from that person and apply them to you. And so what we want to do is avoid that situation. So instead, before an interview, for example, you might reach out to the employer, or you might have support from somebody in employment services reach out to the employer to say, hey, heads up, just want to know, is your business accessible for a wheelchair user? Just so you know, this individual does use a chair to get around. However, as noted by their resume, they have all the skills and qualifications required to fulfill the components of this job and will be excellent from what we can tell. And I just wanted you to know, because we just need to make sure that the elevator works. So that would be an example of timing the disclosure appropriately, where you let somebody know before the interview. It's also important to disclose prior to an interview if you require any accommodations for the interview. So if you are having some challenges with interviews and it's noted that when questions come at you and they're a surprise, that you just totally blank out. And it's because you have anxiety, for example, and you can't process in that situation as successfully as somebody who doesn't have anxiety. And so then you would be asking for an accommodation to say, can I have the questions in advance to prepare my answers. And so in that situation, you're asking for an accommodation prior to the interview taking place. And so you would want to disclose prior to the interview. Um, in in summary, if it's not either of those two situations, then it's best to disclose, if you're going to disclose, after the job offer is there. So unless you need an accommodation for the interview or you have a very visible disability, the rule of thumb is to not provide any information about your disability or your needs until after the job offer is made, and then it would be a direct conversation with either your direct manager or the human resources department, depending on how big the organization or company is. So again, larger conversation that is very individualized for each person, and so this is just general guidance. So I like to make the make the joke from a movie: to disclose or not to disclose. That is the question. So basically, the reasons to disclose is to request an accommodation. So we talked about what that looks like. You would disclose to request an assistive device be paid for or provided by the employer, or if there's a legal obligation to disclose due to health and safety risks to self or others. So some examples. So if you had a request for an accommodation and you were employed at a company for, a couple months or so, and you're starting to get migraines because of the fluorescent lights, that would be a reason to request an accommodation from your employer. And it could be so many different things associated with that. But let's say the accommodation is having 2 fluorescent light bulbs removed from the 4 that are usually in an office space, so that it dims the light just a little bit, but not enough that would impact the lighting of the space or disrupt service. That's one example of an accommodation that could be asked for. It could also be not using the overhead fluorescent lights at all and instead having a lamp put into your office so that you have warm lighting, lower lighting, etc. So that would be an example of requesting an accommodation when you are already employed. Another reason to disclose a need for an accommodation would be if you need an assistive device. So for example, an assistive device could be, I'm working as a cashier and I have knee and back challenges. For example, I could have um, degenerative disc disease or some sort of back injury that I sustained at work a long time ago. And because I'm standing all day, I've become very fatigued and very sore and have pain, and it's impacting my ability to be at work. And so what you could request is an assistive device that would increase your tolerance at work, called an anti-fatigue mat. And that's something that the employer would pay for you. That would increase your ability to work for longer hours, which would be within the context of your shift. So instead of not being able to work your full 8-hour shift, you're only working 6 hours, this fatigue mat could help get you to 8 hours again, or something like that. So that would be a reason to ask for an assistive device and to do a disclosure. The last one was the health and safety risk. So for example, as with everything, if there are health and safety reasons, then disclosure would have to be made to the employer to make them aware. So if you have epilepsy, for example, and you're prone to seizures, and you're working in an environment where you believe that it's possible that a seizure could happen, but you don't think it'll happen frequently, it would be it would be obligated for you to disclose to your employer that you have a seizure disorder and what to do to keep you safe if that happened at work. And so those are some of the reasons why you would disclose. All right, so let's get into duty to accommodate. So duty to accommodate is a law in Ontario that basically means employers are obligated to make changes and adjustments to the job or to the work environment to allow for individuals at work to be successful and equitably be able to perform essential job duties. So all that is to say that if you make an accommodation request, the employer is obligated to um, entertain that request and follow through with asking more questions and potentially implementing that request into the workplace. So, for example, bundling or modifying specific duties that you do on your job, adding flashing lights to an alarm system to ensure that a hearing impaired worker understands the alarm. Those are some examples of accommodations that could be put into place, among others that I already discussed. And in the process of implementing an accommodation, it is the employer's role to specifically determine what barriers might be impacting this individual, exploring options for removing those barriers, and then implementing, accommodating this individual up unto undue hardship. So, all of that is a lot of legal information to basically explain that if you request for um, let's say, overhead lighting to be dimmed because of a disability reason like migraines. If you put that request into your employer in such a way as to say this is an accommodation request, that should cue the employer that they need to investigate that need and follow through according to this law. The process by which that all happens, you could contact PATH and we could help work you through that because it is quite complicated and it is very individualized. So undue hardship is something that I mentioned at the bottom here. So we're going to briefly talk about that because there are some limits to when an employer does have to, there are some limits to when an employer does not have to put an accommodation into place. And that's when undue hardship is quoted. Again, a lot of legal jargon here. So let's unpack it as best as we can. Basically, undue hardship describes the limit by which the employer is not expected to accommodate. So it is very individualized. There's no formula for it. It's not so black and white. And there is no specific judicial definition of undue hardship. So what that means is if this went to court, the court doesn't have like a script of this is when it's undue hardship. There's no clear guidance about that. There's only specific features to look for and like weighing of all of the data to determine whether this was a case of undue hardship or not. But what we need to know as clients is that employers must exhaust all reasonable possibilities to accommodate. And if they do not accommodate us, they have to have substantial evidence and documentation to prove that they had undue hardship. So, what are some examples? So, an employer can say that they could not accommodate because of safety concerns, for example. They could say that doing these changes and adjustments impact other people at this job and therefore it's too much. They could say that the union is being impacted, which is the disruption of the collective agreement. They could say that they're too small and they can't afford to accommodate due to financial concerns or how small their operation is. And so those are all reasons that could be considered reasonable, but they also could not be. And so basically, what we need to know is that there is a lot of ability for employers to accommodate us. So individuals with disabilities, what you need to know in this situation is that you are entitled to accommodations and most of the time it's reasonable. When it's undue hardship, there must be a lot of proof and evidence to suggest that this was too difficult for the employer. So I hope that that empowers you to know that you have more ability to ask for an accommodation. And there are people such as PATHs, employment counselors that can help um, come up with the best way to ask for an accommodation and the best way to disclose disability information so that this sets you up for success and provide you with guidance on when an employer is being reasonable with not accommodating. So some frequently asked questions about accommodations. So the one question is, do I qualify for accommodations? So the short answer for that is most of the time. Everything here is complicated. So if you require an accommodation to perform aspects of your job, the next step is to determine if the aspects of the job are considered essential duties. So when a job has essential duties, it means that there can't be any accommodation for that because it's the core of the job. So I like to explain it to clients as if I was working as a pilot and my job is to be able to see what's in front of me, depth perception, visual acuity. I have all of these sight features of being a pilot. And if I had a vision impairment or was blind, that is not something that can be accommodated. That is a core part of being a pilot. And so that's an example, a very like clear black and white example of essential duty. So an essential duty of a pilot is being able to see. When it comes to other examples, and actually we'll get into that, I think, in the next slide. So let's just stay on this slide for a second here. So accommodations, yes, you are entitled to accommodations unless it is the essential duties of the job. The employer is not required to fundamentally change the working conditions of employees in order to accommodate you. They are not entitled to reassign essential duties of a job to a different employee to accommodate you. And they are not entitled to change the essential duties and requirements of the position in order to accommodate you. So let's talk about what are essential duties. So an essential job task is a standard or rule that is integral to carrying out the functions of a specific position. So basically what that means is, I'll use an example. So I already have the airline pilot example over here, but let's do another one. So if I was a marketing professional and I frequently have to stuff envelopes to provide promotional material, you could argue that that task could easily be reassigned to an administrative support professional, and it's not essential to the job. So if I was a marketing professional and I had arthritis and my hands are just really stiff, so stuffing envelopes is just a very like finger needy, like you need your fingers to be quite like loose and easy to like maneuver. And I might not be able to do that because my fingers are very tense and kind of in a lot of pain. And so you could argue and you could get an accommodation for that situation where you would have that job task reassigned to an administrative support professional within the organization, and you would still be able to perform the main function of your job, which is marketing. And so that's an example um, of when an essential job duty is not in play. So we can accommodate there. That's absolutely a reasonable accommodation. Now, if the opposite was true, so let's say we had a program manager and they were responsible for developing a departmental budget for the year. That's a very skilled job. Being able to develop a budget isn't something that just anybody can do, something that doesn't happen very frequently in that job. And so there could be an argument for that this is an infrequent task, and therefore, is it really essential? Yes, it is, because it's a high level skilled task that is very specific to the program manager role. And so in that situation, it no longer can be assigned to somebody new because it is integral to that job. And so those are some examples of how this can be complicated to sort of figure out. But that's kind of how we determine if it's an integral part of the job, and if it can be reassigned is kind of those sorts of guidance. And so an employer must prove that any accommodation or changes to the standard would create undue hardship. So if they're going to choose not to accommodate, they have to prove their reasons why. And that's the basic idea of essential job tasks. Back to the frequently asked questions. Do I have to prove I have a disability? No, you don't. The employer must accept accommodation requests in good faith unless there's legitimate reasons for acting otherwise. So if you say, I need an accommodation, and you say what that accommodation is, they do not have to say, well, prove you have a disability. Why are you asking for this? Do you have a disability? You don't have to answer that question. However, the employer is entitled to ask for a doctor's note, and that doctor's note is to prove what kind of accommodation would be most appropriate. It does not say what the disability is in the doctor's note. So that actually leads into the next one. So what medical information is my employer entitled to? Um, the employee must answer questions, provide information about relevant restrictions, but does not have to provide the medical diagnosis. So you have to say, I am unable to lift in my job, for example. That would be an example of a restriction. But they don't have to say, I'm unable to lift because I got in a car accident and I have a back injury. That would be too much information and the employer is not entitled to it. Employers should limit requests for information to basically respond to accommodations requests. So they are not supposed to dig. They're not allowed to say, oh, tell me more about that. I want to know what happened. I want to know what exactly is your disability. They're not entitled to any of that information. And the more we share, the more power we give over to the employer rather than to ourselves when we are trying to get our needs accommodated. Can my employer request a doctor's note? Yes, but with certain guidelines. So back in the day, employers could have a policy out there that said, if you're going to be sick, you need a doctor's note to prove you were sick. That's illegal now. So no longer is a employer allowed to have a policy in your manual that says, anytime you're sick, you have to give me a doctor's note. In addition to that, there should be nothing in your employer's manual or onboarding documents that says that the sick note that you do get has to match the day that you called in sick. So there's a new understanding or a more open-minded approach to this in policy that says not always can somebody get in to see their doctor the day that they're ill. And so it is unreasonable to have that as an expectation or a rule within an organization. So when is it reasonable for an employer to ask for a doctor's note? So here are 3 reasons. So within our labor laws, we're entitled to certain amount of time off for sick days. So if the support, a doctor's note would be to support time off beyond the 10-day minimum allowed for emergency or sick days per year. So if you're coming up to, I've asked for a certain number of days off in a row, and they're starting to wonder, is this person ever coming back to work? They are entitled to ask for a doctor's note in that situation. It also would help with eligibility for short-term or long-term disability. So if you're ill and you expect to be off for longer than a week, for example, that might be a short-term disability conversation. And the employer is entitled to have information around how long you're expected to be gone based on the doctor's assessment. And when you are coming back to work, they're entitled to know what would need to be put into place for you to be successful in your return to work. And that's part of the last point here too, where medical support in response to a request for an accommodation. So a doctor's opinion about what type of accommodation is appropriate, not the diagnosis. when can I request an accommodation? So a lot of times clients or individuals with disabilities will be very anxious that, oh no, I didn't ask for an accommodation from the very beginning, and now I'm not entitled to it because I didn't ask for it from the beginning, so all these expectations have been set into place. So you don't have to worry about that. You can ask for an accommodation at any time in employment, at the beginning, closer to the end, in the middle. It doesn't matter when in the employment process you're at. You can always ask for an accommodation, and things change. So you may not have needed an accommodation when you first started, but then sometime closer to the middle, something happens, and then you do need an accommodation. And so it's okay to recognize that things can change over time and sometimes adjustments are needed. In addition, it's best to request accommodations if you're noticing that there's a workplace obstacle that's preventing you because of your disability to perform your job. So if you're having some performance struggles at work and you think that it's due to something to do with your disability, then before it becomes a reprimand from the employer, you would want to talk to your manager or to your HR about what sorts of accommodations could help you to improve your success at work. And so that would be an example of removing workplace obstacles so that you can perform more effectively at work with an accommodation. And so ideally, you would want to make these requests before your job performance suffers. And then when you have made an accommodation request and it's been implemented, it's okay. In fact, it's preferable and recommended to continuously talk to your employer about if those accommodations are working for you and if they need to be adjusted over time during the course of employment. So here are some resources and referrals. So if you're interested in learning more about employment rights, and a duty to accommodate, undue hardship, essential job tasks. Here are some of the resources. So Arch Disability Law Center, they are excellent and specifically work with clients with intellectual disabilities. Hamilton Community Legal Clinic, Steps to Justice is a website. Community Legal Education Ontario, again, as a website. Canadian Human Rights Commission, Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, Employment Standards Act. So those are all, the last three are the ones that are the primary sources from the government in terms of rights and responsibilities. Okay, so we are actually switching gears to a new topic here to talk about working well on ODSP. I don't know if, should I just keep powering on or should we do questions at the end or should we do questions about that topic first?
Well, maybe we can give 2 or 3 questions about that because people are in the mindset on
Yeah.
that topic. And so, yeah, I suggest maybe the 2, 3, not go into a long discussion, so you can go to the second part. If people rather write the question in the chat, that's okay. I can read the questions that you put in the chat. That's fine. Okay. And I will read them. So I'll just open my chat. Okay. So let's see if I have any ones. So in your experience, because you work with a lot of people and employers too, how receptive they are? How receptive they are, the employers, to accommodate and yeah, that's my general questions, but I'm sure that you have experiences.
Yeah, so basically employers are invested in having employees that are productive and efficient and successful at work. And so when we bring forward a client and we're putting forward as this individual requires some sort of accommodation which will help them to be efficient and successful at work. then yes, the employer is more likely to accommodate in that circumstance. And so a lot of the times it's the way that it's approached with the employer that can make the big difference in terms of how receptive they are to putting accommodations into place. And so that's why we spend a lot of time educating clients on how to ask for what they need and how to ask for accommodations, how to speak about their disability with employers, what to say, what not to say, because a lot of the success comes from how it's communicated. Because if we come with like a laundry list of things I can't do, that's not going to be well received by the employer. If I come with, if I'm in a job interview and I'm a person with a disability and I spend a lot of my time in the interview talking about any negative experiences that I had at former employers or any challenges that I have about getting to work because I have a disability, etc., then it's going to leave a bad taste in the employer's mouth. And that's just logical for the employer to be kind of concerned about that. And so we always focus on abilities. So every single person, disability or not, has abilities that they bring to the table. They have passions, they have skills, they have expertise. And so when presenting somebody to an employer, it's about this person has these skills and abilities that will benefit your organization. Now, here are the small minor adjustments that need to be made for this person to equitably be able to perform the way that everybody else can perform on the job. These accommodations and assistive devices often are free. They are often less than $20. The more expensive ones go up to about $500, but like the amount of times you actually need to do something that expensive is so minimal. And so essentially the rhetoric or the way that we put it forward to the employer is um, hiring people costs a lot of money. Firing people costs a lot of money. So let's put in our due diligence to set people up for success at the beginning so that they can be a loyal employee for you and you will have cost savings ultimately. So if it's going to cost you $100 to buy text to speech software for somebody with a learning disability at the beginning and it's going to improve their productivity for you, why not? Why wouldn't you? Because if you choose to not put that into place for this person, then their effective, how effective they're going to be at their job is going to be lower, and then you're ultimately going to be frustrated, everybody involved, and then potentially let this person go before probation is up, and then you're incurring more cost to your organization because hiring and firing is the most expensive part of all businesses. And so a lot of it is just discussions around all of those pieces. And if you have those discussions, most employers will be happy to accommodate. The ones that don't, we don't want to work for them anyways. So no harm, no foul. We'll move on to the next one.
Thank you, Sarah. David, you had two important questions, but I think it needs context. So let me know if you want me to just read them as they are, or you want to provide some context to the questions, so everybody can see that in the chat. But
Yeah.
But I think it needs some context to be able to. Okay.
Yeah. I think a little bit of context for that would be helpful. I do see
Yeah.
the how much money does employer get in tax rebates to accommodate. So I wouldn't know the answer to that question, to be honest. I think employers do get, they might get some benefits from accommodating, and the monies that they're put forward to accommodating could be a tax rebate. But to be honest, that's not part of my specialization. So if an employer spends 10,000 on ramps for wheelchairs, how much rebate for tax? Honestly, I wouldn't have an idea about that. I think the amount of employers out there that have 10 grand to put towards building ramps is very low. The bigger organizations should have already done that years ago. And so it's the small businesses that are now trying to come up to code with the Human Rights Code that we're supposed to be accessible by 2025, I think it was. And that includes, like you said, accessibility ramps. So there are things out there like wedges that some employers are purchasing where if they only have like one step up into their place of business, they can buy a wedge that just goes right up against the cement and allows for a ramp at a much lower cost than actually building out an entire wheelchair accessible ramp. And so stuff like that, I think, yeah, there might be rebates and stuff out there, but that's not something that that I've had to address with employers. That would be more of a no, I don't even know, maybe like a legal representation of their organization, making sure that they're up to code. That would be more so their role, I would think.
Thanks, Sarah. So unless we have another question, maybe we can go to the ODSP part. Yeah, is anyone wants to add, or David, do you have another question? No? Okay. So
Okay.
go ahead, Sarah. Go to the working well on this. That's a
Okay.
very important. We have many clients that are on ODSP.
Okay, great. So working well on ODSP, so there actually has been a new change that came up recently in regards to this. So new rules for earning well on ODSP. So as of February 1st, 2023, if you are a person with a disability, you can earn up to $1,000 a month through employment without it affecting your ODSP income support, benefits, or eligibility. So previously, you could earn up to $200 a month, and then it would start, the government would start to take 50%, I believe it was, back, and you would keep 50%.
Yeah.
So now that it's changed to $1,000, that's a very big difference. And this became in effect on the March 2023 payment. So like literally this month, this is just happening. So if you haven't seen the results of that yet, it's coming.
And then after the $1,000, then it's 50-50?
Yeah, we'll get to that. It's
Okay.
25%, I believe, but we'll get to
Okay.
that.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, so benefits of working. So you can make $1,000 without any deductions. After the first 1,000, 25% of all earnings is also exempt from the deductions. And then there's also a $100 work-related benefit each month you earn that gets added on. And so we're going to actually break this down into a real example so that you can understand it better, because I personally am not a math person. I'm a very visual person. So I tried to put it in a way that would be better understood. Okay, so before we get to that, we're going to talk a little bit more about other benefits of working. So in addition to being able to make $1,000 without any money taken off, and that $100 work benefit, so it's just extra money tacked on for the fact that you just have a job, you also would keep your health benefits. So a lot of times the main concern that clients have when they go and work while on ODSP is like, I won't have my health benefits. I can't pay for my medications. I can't pay for my orthotics or whatever else they're concerned about. But if you're working, you're still entitled to your health benefits. It's just called the extended health benefit or the transitional health benefit. So extended health benefit being you're approved to stay on this benefit while you're working, whereas the transitional health benefit is kind of like you were on ODSP, but you're going to be working and you have this time in between. And so we're going to give you this transitional money to help you with your medications until the work benefits kick in. So when we go and work, sometimes we get benefits as part of our employment. And if the employer has benefits, you often can't get into it until like 3 months into employment, let's say. And so this transitional health benefit is there to bridge that gap between when that starts and when you leave ODSP's health benefits. Or if you don't get comparable health benefits from your employer. So for example, sometimes the employer's benefits are maybe not covering what you need covered for your orthotics, let's say, and the benefits that you had with ODSP were better for that. And so there's a bridging amount that can be given from ODSP to help compensate for the amount that the employer is not covering through their benefits for that. So there's a bunch of things there, and you would talk to your ODSP worker to clarify that. Additionally, if you're a person that benefits or needs accommodations or assistive devices at work, there's another benefit that is up to $1,000 of coverage for accommodations and assistive devices at work. So if you're concerned about startup costs on the job, so for example, um, let's say you have a special laptop that you need that you would take with you to work because it has a text to speech software on it that you need at work. So you wouldn't have to worry about um, the employer having that for you. You could get up to $1,000 to have that brought with you to the employer if that's enough money to cover that cost. Every month that you report earnings, you can claim the full cost of childcare, or up to $600 if it's unlicensed childcare. So if you're a single mother and you need somebody to watch your son while you're at work, if you have a licensed daycare, 100% of your daycare costs are covered by ODSP. If you find a nanny or an unlicensed childcare, then up to $600 of it is covered by ODSP so that you can work. Okay, so here's an example. So we're going to break down the earning $1,000 and then the 25%. So if you make $1,550 a month, so this is an example of if you work 25 hours per week, because that's pretty standard. Like a lot of people will work 20, 25 hours in a week and then maintain their ODSP. So if you make $1,550 a month, working 25 hours per week at minimum wage, which is currently $1,550, you would take home the first $1,000 without any deductions. You would then take home $137.50 without any deductions. So that's 25% of $550, which is what's left over after we minus out $1,000. And so your income from working is $1,137.50. So all of the money that's not listed there was deducted by ODSP. But we still made more money in this situation. So let's go and look at this in like a holistic way. So the same 25 hours per week, you made $1,137.50 from working. Your monthly income support from ODSP is $1,228. That's like your shelter portion, your special allowance or whatever. That's like the most that people can make usually. I think maybe not even including special diet allowance and all that, but like that's like the shelter portion maximum that you can make. Now, if you were working 25 hours, going back to this slide here, this is how much we determined you would make at the bottom. So now if we add that to your monthly support from ODSP, plus how much money you worked, plus the benefit for working, that free money, free $100, you're actually making $2,465.50 a month, which is an extra income of $1,237.50 compared to if you just were on ODSP and you didn't work at all. So hopefully that's a clear visual of how you can make more money while working and staying on ODSP. So what happens if I lose my job? So that's a lot. That's an excellent question and one that comes up a lot. So a lot of people who are accessing ODSP have what we call episodic disabilities. So that means that things can come and go. So there might be times where I can work full time and it's fine. And then all of a sudden, my disease or my disability flares up and I can't work at all. And so that like coming and going. So you could maybe go completely off ODSP and be working a full-time job. And then what happens when that job ends? Do I go back on ODSP or how does that all work? So what happens is if you lose your job and you can no longer work and you need financial help, the first thing you would do is find out if you qualify for EI, so employment insurance. So that's the income support that's out there for anybody who loses a job of no fault of their own due to a layoff, or like an end of season, for example. There are some individuals that can access employment insurance if they are let go, um, but it would have to be for no fault of their own. So meaning you didn't do anything like um, steal from the employer or cause abusive language or some reason or what they call cause for being let go. So if for some reason you are laid off or it's the end of season or you're let go before probation ends and it's not for a cause, then you could access employment insurance. If you need income support from ODSP and let's say you're not eligible for employment insurance, then you would call your caseworker or your local ODSP office to start what they call rapid reinstatement. So ODSP is for life. So you're not ever not eligible for ODSP unless something really significant changes with your health and a doctor goes and says you're okay. Um, like for example, some people will go on ODSP when they have cancer and they're not able to work, but then when they're totally clear of all cancer and they're in remission, then the doctor will say this person no longer needs to be on ODSP, and then they would no longer have ODSP. But for the majority of people, that's not going to happen. And so rapid reinstatement is something that is just a process of getting your income support back into place with ODSP. So I actually think that might be the end here. So here are the references for how I got this information. So ODSP and employment supports. And yeah, does anybody have any questions about earning money while on ODSP?
Okay, Sarah, I actually answered one of the question I had. So, by the way, people were asking about the presentation. So we will send the presentation to all the participants. So you will be able to have it, the information. So that's just for the people who need to leave and now they know that they have the decision. Now David is asked, how much before you get taken off ODSP? I'm sorry, David. I'm not sure I understand the question. I guess the idea is how much do you need? I think so, David. Correct me if I'm wrong, but how much do you need to earn before you will get off or of this? But I understand from what you said that ODSP is really has to do with your medical situation and nothing to do with your work situation. And I understand that the $1,000 is really has to do with it doesn't matter how much you make. Is that correct?
Yeah, so if you're working full-time hours, for example, it's at that point that the amount of income you would be getting from ODSP would be very, very low. So I don't think you would ever be necessarily off ODSP in that situation. It's just that who's giving you the money. So either the government's paying you or your employer's paying you. And so in that situation, the employer is paying the bulk of your income and you would likely still be getting some minor benefits from ODSP, like the work benefit, for example, that I mentioned, that $100, as well as your health benefits and maybe your special diet allowance. And so there are some people that will kind of term themselves as being off ODSP, but they're not really off ODSP as much as they are working so much that the employer is paying most of their income. And then the rapid reinstatement would be if you lost that job and you needed your income through ODSP to go back up to the 1,228 shelter support that they provide.
Thanks, thank you. I have, you gave us a lot of information, a really great example, like in general example, but you have been working in the area for many years. So it would be nice if you could give us a scenario, it doesn't have to be with any kind of revealing information, but as an example whereby a person with severe physical or mental disabilities navigated the job search and getting a job, successfully, just so people can have an idea. Because a lot of it is come out of fear that they say, nobody's going to hire me. Employers will have one look at me or listen to the way I speak, and they'll decide not to hire me. So it would be nice to hear kind
Yeah,
of a successful navigation.
absolutely. Yeah, so difficult to pick just one because that's something that I see daily. And lots of success of individuals with disabilities getting into employment successfully and happily. But one that I think of specifically is, let's see, narrowing it down. So there's an individual that had an acquired brain injury that was able to re-enter employment after essentially not being able to talk or make decisions and such. And then the brain is a wonderful magical thing that really can learn and grow and change and adapt. And so a brain injury can be very difficult and change a lot of things in your life in a short period of time. But with time, it improves depending on how damaged that various part of the brain is. But basically, this particular individual re-entered into the workforce in a different field, and is successful and happy in the role that they have. Um, and there's accommodations put into place for that person to be successful as well. And so the employer was open-minded to those sorts of accommodations. So that's one example.
Sarah,
In
do
addition,
you in fact navigate that with employers? Are you helping people with disability navigate that with the employer? Or you
yes.
have employers already that know, have been working with people with disability before, and they're
Yeah,
open for.
both. Both
Okay.
for sure. So a lot of times people will say like, "Hey, do you have a list of employers that are very accommodating and open to hiring people with disabilities?" The answer to that is no. There's no master list. What we do is a very individualized approach where we learn about the abilities of our clients. So this client maybe has autism, let's say, and we learn about what their skills and abilities are and where some of the challenges are. And then we craft like a plan with that individual for moving them forward in their employment goal. So it always starts with that person about what are you passionate about? What do you want to do? What are your past employment history or education? And maybe talking a little bit about what challenges have come up in employment in the past that we could learn a little bit about how to position you better for the future. And then approaching the employer with the skills and abilities of that individual, saying, hey, this person has these skills. They have shown that they are reliable and that they can show up for work. Here's what we would need to do for them to be successful in an interview. So that would be an accommodation. Once they get hired, then it might be a new conversation where it's like, okay, so this person's been hired, and for this person to be successful, we need to look at adjusting the lighting because of some sensory sensitivities. which is a feature of autism, and providing some guidance with the employer on how to integrate this employee into the workplace. And so it's a case by case basis, both on the employer side as well as the client side. So um, the more the employers interact with us and have successes with the clients that we've advocated for, the more likely they are to come back and be open-minded again. So in that sense, you could say that there are some employers that we work with that are more open-minded and more open to accommodating. But because we're meeting the clients where they're at and we want to know about what they're passionate about, what they want, we're always reaching out to new employers that match with the skills and abilities of our clients. And so those conversations are always happening, and we don't know what we're going to get on the other end from the employer. But we're always trying to educate and decrease biases and set people up for success in supportive environments.
Okay. So do you have a, sorry, nobody else is having a question? I'm asking all the questions. Do you have any kind of job fairs for people with disabilities, or yes, that's
Yeah, we've done that in the past. The pandemic kind of put a wrench in that for a bit there, and I think we've had a few job fairs recently, and they're not necessarily like advertising like, hey, we have a whole bunch of people with disabilities that are looking to be hired. It's again looking at it more from a perspective of we have a whole bunch of people with abilities who want to be hired, and if there's a need for advocacy or accommodations or support for that person to be successful, then we would do that more on the other end after the job fair is done to support that person. So there is a question in
great.
here. Have you seen any bias or discrimination about asking for accommodation with mental health issues or learning disabilities? Um, so there are always going to be people out there that are discriminatory, and there are biases. I mean, we all have to recognize that we have biases and we have understandings about people that are going to be incorrect and false. Um, and so the short answer to that is yes, there are going to be employers out there that have reactions and inappropriate responses when we ask for accommodations, or if we say we have anxiety, or we say we have a learning disability. But if somebody is coming alongside you to help support you in that process, they can try to set that conversation up for success from the very beginning, or coach you on how to talk about those things with the employer in a way that will be more likely accepted. So, for example, if you have anxiety and you're at work and you're having a panic attack at work, and you're thinking like, I I have to tell my employer because I can't cope with this. There are different ways of kind of communicating your needs when you're not currently in crisis. So if you're actively in a panic attack and you need space to like walk away and like regroup, completely understandable. You would want to wait until you come back down to base level to communicate your needs to the employer for the next time if that was to happen. So the accommodation request would be something like, at times I can have physiological reactions to situations and I can't control that. I need space to step away for 5 minutes to collect myself and then I'll come back. And so, would it be okay if when you schedule me, you have somebody else always on shift with me who can kind of cover if that happens? So, that would be an example of um, it's kind of called job sharing, where you have two people on shift at all times, and if that's part of the employer's um, setup anyways, then it's really easy because it's just this person does this part of the job, this person does that part of the job. And if I'm doing my part of the job and I need to step away for 5 minutes to like regroup, then there's somebody else there to like compensate. And the other person who's compensating doesn't need to know that that's what they're doing. And it works out because everybody's working together in a team environment. Now, if you're the one person on shift and that's just the nature of the place and it's they don't have money because they're a very small business and they only can afford to have one person in at a time, then that becomes a bit more challenging of a conversation to have for you to step away. Maybe it is still possible, but it's very workplace specific to what that could look like and what kinds of requests would be reasonable and accepted by the employer. Because that's that undue hardship conversation. But again, something that's very tricky to navigate independently, which is why I always suggest contacting somebody at Path Employment to help you out with that.
Fantastic, Sarah. So is anyone else that, if not, I would like Sarah to thank you so very much. You brought us a lot of really good new information and up-to-date information that really going to serve our clients. So I'm really, really happy that you took the time and gave us from your experience. And I hopefully, if we have any question in the future regarding our clients, maybe we will be able to pick up the phone and pick your brain about the most specific. And I know that one of the participants who needed to leave early said that they have their own issue, that they're probably going to be in touch with you. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes.
Yeah, anybody at Path is able to help out with any questions or inquiries. Usually it starts with Louise, and Louise will sort of be the point of entry to figure out where that question should go. Yeah, and a lot of times Tara, or our executive director, will sort of field some of these concerns or questions that are specific when the client can't access an employment consultant because they're in school full time or something like that. Like, we're always willing to help out with clients that don't fall within like the rules of employment services and stuff like that. So yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you.